Imagine having access to the latest news at your fingertips. Introducing the newly rebranded and improved Daily Nation website. With our innovative online flipping page feature, you can read the newspaper just like you would in print. Plus, with our subscription-based model, you will get access to exclusive content, archives, and more. So why wait? Sign up now and experience the future of news. Daily Nation, now at your fingertips.
Good evening and welcome to the National Economic Indaba show. We are very excited this evening to be back on your screens to discuss all things to do with the economy. And we have an exciting guest for you as usual this evening. And this is a certified, accountant who is a sustainability expert, because this evening we are going to delve into sustainability for economic growth. My name is Nakeo Simpungu. As usual, I'm your host, and my guest is Mrs. Rabecca Silolezya. Rabecca, good evening and welcome to the National Economic Indaba.
Good evening, Nakeo, and it's a pleasure to be here with you.
Great stuff. We had to look, for somebody who would really discuss sustainability with us, and who better than you? We follow your work, and we are very excited that you made time. We know that, you have a very busy schedule, but you made time to come, and we don't take it for granted.
Thanks, Nakeo. I'm humbled that I have this opportunity to have this conversation with you.
Great stuff indeed. To those that are joining us via our social media platforms on Millennium TV, Facebook page, and the National Economic Indaba Facebook page, we say welcome. As well to those that are joining us on Channel 95 on Topstar, thank you so much for making time to be with us. Now, Rabecca, the word sustainability is common. It's a common word, but in context to what you do, I think that this is where there is a little bit of a challenge. I think a lot of people would like to understand what sustainability, in line with your work is. So if you could just take us to what exactly is sustainability?
Okay, that's actually a great place to start, Nakeo, because you've rightfully said it. Sustainability means so many different things for different people, but at the heart of it, sustainability is really about thinking about the long term. So not just thinking about the short term. And there's a perfect definition that was coined by the UN Brundtland Commission, which is really that sustainable development is development that meets the needs of today without compromising future generations from being able to meet their own needs. So the decisions that we're making today, how are they going to impact future generations being able to meet their own needs? So the businesses that we're creating today, how are we going to ensure that they continue to exist in 2050, considering the climate that will be around at that time?
Great stuff. I think that really does sum it up for me as well, because I also was wondering what sustainability in this context is. So now, What does sustainable economic growth mean to you, and how can it be achieved?
Sure. So picking up from the definition around sustainable development, sustainable economic growth really feeds into the same definition. So how do we grow as an economy in a way that enables us to ensure that future generations are also going to be able to meet their own needs, right? So is our growth ambitious enough? Is it considering the environment? Is the environment being protected as we pursue our growth? Are we ensuring that we're not leaving anybody behind and that we're not just thinking about economic growth? So the same applies even for business. So businesses, not just thinking about profit, but thinking about how they impact communities, how they also lean into those communities to create value, thinking about how they interact with relationships that they lean into, so employees. So how does a business basically create value from the activities that it has and the relationships within its ecosystem? So when we think about sustainable economic growth, it's growth that's not just thinking about the business or the economy, but growth that's thinking about all these other pillars. So thinking about the environment and thinking about the fact that we need to make sure that we're not leaving anybody behind.
Great stuff, great stuff. Now, what role do you see, innovation and technology playing in driving sustainable economic growth?
So I see innovation and technology being that enabling pillar, because in order for us to move to the next era, we're already seeing technology starting to impact the way we do things.
Right.
I mean, we're seeing generative AI basically take over and having to force us to think about how do we leverage the power of technology to do things much more efficiently, quicker. And the same applies in terms of economic development and growth. How do we leverage technology to create solutions that solve our problems today and in the future? So when I think about the local context and the way we've been able to leverage technology, when you think about mobile money and the way people are able to transact easily, we were not able to do this, a decade ago. But imagine the volumes of transactions that are being enabled by technology within our context here in Zambia, and what that has done for financial inclusion. That small business, that entrepreneur that is able to accept payments because they've been able to participate in the technological advancements from a mobile money perspective. So I'd expect that technology should be able to help us find those solutions that are homegrown, that help us to incorporate more people into economic activity, that help us to come up with solutions that solve our problems, and that ultimately that everybody is encouraged to think about technology as that enabler and not really the instrument that's going to take over their current space. Yeah.
Interesting that you should say that, because I was going to ask now, there's this advent of AI and how it's really just freaking some people out, for lack of better word. They're so concerned. They're like, this is going to take over our jobs. What do you say as a sustainability expert? Will AI take over people's jobs?
I think...
Is your job safe?
No, I think one thing holds true is that we need to evolve, adapt to the changes that are happening in our environments, and then continue to remain relevant. Then from a sustainability perspective, it's really thinking about, with these technological changes, what social changes are actually going to start happening. With technological changes, as skill sets becoming irrelevant or going to become irrelevant, and what does it mean for empowerment? What does it mean for the government? What does it mean for businesses to position their employees, to position their populations to be able to take advantage of these changes that are happening? And that requires empowerment. So I think from a sustainability perspective, it really just means that we need to almost envision where the world will be, where Zambia will be in 2050 or 2030 from a technological perspective. Does it mean that we're going to have more jobs that are in the green space, or more jobs that are going to require specific knowledge around technologies? And then what does it mean for the decisions that we're making now? Are we making decisions that position us to have the right skill sets when those changes are happening. So that is really having sustainability in mind, because then you're not just thinking about today. You're thinking about in 2050, what is the Zambian population going to look like? We're seeing a lot of youths that are graduating, and that's good. We're seeing even Africans, a lot of Africans. We have a young African population, and it's even going to become younger as we progress into the next decade or two. So what does that mean from an AI or technology perspective? It just means that we need to be able to empower this generation and the next to be able to harness the potential that comes from using technology, because everybody else is using technology to advance their economic growth.
Great stuff. Now, how can economic growth be decoupled, from environmental degradation, and what strategies can be used to achieve?
Sure. I think decoupling economic growth from environmental degradation requires us to really think about integrating sustainability into our business practices and even into our policies as a nation. So when you think about it from government, how do we incorporate policies that are going to encourage good sustainable practices? So whether it's in government, whether it's in business, because then ultimately, as we encourage more sustainable practices, then we should hopefully see less of environmental degradation. I mean, if we look at the mining sector, for example, we keep hearing of environmental spills. The Kafue River is polluted today, the next day. So we keep hearing these stories that are happening, and they're real stories. But what does it mean for the policy environment? Do we have the right policy environment? Do we have the right enforcement actions being taken to ensure that when that happens, that businesses are held accountable? But at the same time, businesses can also be encouraged. So the mining entities can also be encouraged to mine in a sustainable way, to mine in a way that ensures that those spills don't even happen in the first place. Because when you look at it from a sustainability perspective, and that's what you'll see more businesses start to do more of with this agenda, is that they'll start to think about, where are my sustainability risks and opportunities? Now, in the mining sector, one of the significant risks is how they manage those tailings dams. So if a business is truly embarking on a sustainability journey, they'll set up a strategy that ensures that that risk is managed. And then they'll look to best practices, they'll look to guidance, they'll look to frameworks as to how they actually manage that significant risk. So the hope is that as you are curating the regulatory environment, that businesses are also embracing and integrating these sustainability and sustainable practices within their strategies, such that over time, as businesses transform, we should see less of environmental degradation, because it's in our best interest as a nation, it's in our best interest as a business to ensure that that natural capital, where we get our resources from, that water body, where even the communities that serve us get their much needed water, that it's protected. So we start to move in a direction that thinks first around the shared responsibility that the business has, or that the government has with the different communities, to ensure that the policy environment ultimately enables us to get to a place where there's less of environmental degradation, and hopefully have the right enforcement action, like I mentioned, that when it does happen, that there's a deterrent, and that people and companies know that we shouldn't do it again, because these are the consequences.
Do you think that so far do we, in this country, have policies that favor,
No, the policies are there, and there are many. There's a lot of policies, and you've seen even Zema most recently come out and stipulate exactly what the requirements are. So I think what's important is for us to introspect as to where are the gaps. Where are the gaps? Is it enforcement? Is it that perhaps right from the get-go, the business isn't thinking about sustainability as being part of its strategy from the get-go? The more mature operations, you will see them demonstrate how they're incorporating sustainability within their vision, their purpose, and how they expect to basically create value over the long term. So the policy environment is there. I think even from a reporting perspective, Zambia just recently mandated sustainability reporting standards for listed companies to start with as of January 1, 2025. So we should expect to see companies start this journey, right? And this journey is going to require them to not just report, but in order for them to know what to report, they're going to need to set some strategy at the very beginning, because they're not going to report on everything. A mining entity's sustainability matters are very different from a financial institution.
Right.
So every institution is going to internalize what sustainability means for them, and then ultimately create for a much more mature sustainability landscape for us in Zambia.
Great stuff. Now, what are the potential economic benefits of transitioning to a more sustainable and environmentally friendly economy?
I think first and foremost, it's in building. So the main benefit, in my view, is in being able to build a resilient economy, right? What we've seen over the last decade or two is that, and I think the government recently published in the green growth strategy, that we've accumulated losses worth $13 billion as a result of climate change over the last 60 years. And this is before the drought, right? So I think that one of the main benefits of going on to a sustainability agenda as a business or even as a nation is really that we're going to start to build resilience in our economic activity. And you'll see that our aspirations, whether it's in the Green Growth Strategy, Vision 2030, the 8th National Development Plan, all speak to sustainable growth, right? And that comes from the fact that in order for us to be able to achieve sustainable growth, it means that there's certain things that we're going to need to think about: environmental protection, making sure that it's socially inclusive, that we're not leaving anybody behind. Because ultimately, if we have a resilient, community, a resilient population, these are the same people that are going to show up for the jobs. These are the same people that are going to contribute to economic activity. So you have a healthy population, an educated population that's going to contribute to economic activity. So not just thinking about growth in the sense of, financial, but really looking beyond that, because ultimately value is created from these different sources of capital. So I think the main benefit, to recap, is that we will be able to start to build resilience. I don't know what the current drought, the impact of the current drought has been on our GDP in terms of a quantified number, but pre the drought, we've recorded about $13 billion in GDP losses. That's significant. And if we take it down to even a business, a farmer, for example, that was not on irrigation, and then the drought hit, it means that they were not able to continue to supply ShopRite. I'll give ShopRite as an example. Maybe they were not yet in ShopRite, but maybe Pick and Pay, maybe Melissa. And they worked so hard to get that contract, to be able to start to supply Pick and Pay, ShopRite, Melissa, and then the drought hits and they are not on irrigation. So if that farmer perhaps had been given the opportunity and the empowerment to start to think about building resilience within their operations, maybe 2-3 years before, they would have assessed that I'm vulnerable and heavily impacted by water availability. So how do I ensure that I have water availability and not only waiting for rains to come through? So you start to invest in irrigation. We've seen the government invest significantly in mechanization, but how does that trickle down to that farmer that's growing tomatoes? Because ultimately economic activity will be driven by every single SME and entrepreneur that's producing or contributing to economic activity.
Great stuff. To those that are just joining us, you are watching the National Economic Indaba Show on Millennium TV. Our guest this evening is sustainability expert and chartered accountant, Mrs. Rabecca Silolezya, and we are discussing all things to do with sustainability in economic growth. Now, Rabecca, how can natural capital be valued and incorporated into economic decision making?
So that's a really good question, Nakiwe. There are various tools that help with calculating or determining the value of nature. But in terms of how you can incorporate this into decision making, I think it's really thinking about coming back to my earlier comments around each business internalizing how they're dependent on nature. So depending on the nature services that you're dependent on, you would have to be thinking about, how do I ensure that I protect this source, this service that I'm dependent on? And how do I also ensure that other people that are dependent on it are equally being given the opportunity? So it comes back to sustainability, that the decisions I'm making today are not going to impact future generations from being able to benefit. An example could be that, let's say I'm a commercial farmer and I'm heavily reliant on water, as you would expect. I have access to the river. We get the best land near the river. And then we start to see, as a farmer, I start to see that, okay, I'm struggling to get the water that I need. My boreholes have dried up. I think I'm just going to access the river directly. But in order for me to do that, I need to dam the river, meaning that communities and other farmers downstream won't have access to it. Right. So it now becomes that conversation around, how do I responsibly use nature? How do I take from nature less than what I'm actually putting back, so that I'm in a nature positive equation? So I'm an accountant. We love to see positive numbers, that I'm not taking more from nature than I'm giving back, right? So in order for me as a business, or even as a nation, leaders in our nation to make those decisions, they would have to be informed by data, right? And to your point, how do we know how much we can value our nature? How do we know? And there's tools to be able to do that. But once we know that information, that this is either how much we're dependent on nature, or this is the value that we can get from nature, because there's also the opportunity, right? There's the opportunity to be able to leverage our natural capital to now unlock financing. And Zambia has a huge opportunity, because we're endowed with, I think it's 49 million hectares of forest, right? And that is a huge asset that is currently being utilized to unlock financing through the carbon markets. Whilst it's not yet at a large scale, but this has been going on for the last, probably for the last decade or so. And there's developers out there that are coming up with projects to conserve specific forests and then unlocking, financing from that. Now, we need to be able to do that on a large scale, but that comes from recognizing the value that comes from nature. It also comes from recognizing that, a tree that is alive is more valuable than a dead tree. At the same time, we have this 40-something million hectares of forest that's available to us, but we're cutting it down really quickly. So we're cutting it down really quickly, but it's partly because there's a lack of a complete appreciation of the value that we can get from making sure that we don't cut down as many trees. But at the same time, there's also an economic need. So coming back to sustainable development, how do you ensure that charcoal farmer how do you tell somebody who's hungry today that you can't cut down this tree because it's going to unlock this revenue to you in the next 10 years, but they're hungry today. So how do we create those alternative sources alternative sources of income, such that that tree that is alive shouldn't be seen as being more valuable when it's cut down? So from a natural capital, I think we have a huge opportunity. I think beyond our mining resources, the next resource that we have available to us to unlock fully is the carbon markets.
Great stuff. What policies and regulations can governments implement to promote sustainable economic growth?
In terms of policies that the government...
Again, we're back at policies.
Yes. No, I mean, it's important. Policies are important because the government has to play a role in curating the environment, right? They have to create an environment that ensures that, we have the right policies around our conservation of the forest that we just talked about. that we have the right policies around empowering the people or the populations, for example, that are close to those forests, such that they see the alternatives to having to cut down trees because they've been empowered, whether it's through CDF or whatever it is, that they've been empowered enough that they can generate economic activity outside of environmental degradation. So we need specific policies, and they're there. The policies are there, whether it's the Environmental Protection Act. We now have the Green Economy and Climate Change Act, which was recently enacted in December. It's yet to be operationalized, but there's a lot of provisions in there that are really going to help us set us up for the right sustainable economic growth. Every business is going to have to think about its footprint. The sectors that are high emitting, whether it's agriculture and mining, are really going to have to think about their contribution to our current footprint. One would say that, Zambia is not one of the highest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. And greenhouse gas emissions, by the way, are really, whether you agree with the science or don't agree with the science, but the fact is that we're experiencing extreme weather events. We're experiencing a warmer climate, and it's being attributed to these greenhouse gas emissions. So mostly carbon dioxide. So from your college days, your high school days, the carbon dioxide is pretty much being trapped, and the other gases being trapped on this side of the earth. So the more we produce, the more we industrialize, the more we're seeing most of these gases. And that's why your developed nations are contributing significantly to the greenhouse gases, which are causing the changes in our climate. So one might say Zambia does not contribute much, but we are experiencing the most of the climate change effects, right? We either have floods or we have droughts, cyclones, resource scarcity, and all of these are heavily impacting least developed nations. Africa, for example, only contributes 4% of the greenhouse gas emissions from a global perspective. So when you look at it from that perspective, you're saying, we don't contribute much. Why should we care? Why should we even come up with policies? Why should the government care? But we should care because globally, we have a shared responsibility. We're part of a global village. In 2015, as part of the UN conferences on climate change, we agreed globally, all parties that attended, that we're going to limit the increase of temperatures to pre-industrial levels, so well below 2 degrees Celsius. So the target is 1.5 degrees Celsius, right? Now, we already breached the 1.5 degrees Celsius in May 2024 last year, right? So, and we can feel it. We've felt the increase in temperatures. So, which means that the time to act is now, right? And the policies that even our government is implementing to contribute to this global commitment is really going to ensure that even Zambia is contributing to this agenda. So we have significant policies from the government. If you even look at the regulatory environment, the 8th National Development Plan is really speaking to achieving sustainable growth as well. Vision 2030, you now have all these different strategies, whether it's the Green Growth Strategy, our commitment to the Paris Agreement, the NDCs, which is really our nationally determined contributions, are also meant to be implemented. So all of these, pieces of legislation or policy or whatever it may be are meant to help create that environment. I think where more work needs to be done is really on the implementation side. I don't think there's significant gaps from a policy perspective. I think it's now we need to walk the talk. We now need to look at, okay, we've come up with this strategy, and I'll use the Green Growth Strategy as an example because it's very easy to follow. It's very specific. We must achieve, sustainable growth by 2030, and very specific around, how it's going to be achieved, how much we need, and it's a $10 billion investment that is required to implement this strategy. And then there's milestones every year. So we should be able to see how well we're doing against that specific KPI or milestone that we've set for ourselves. So I wouldn't say there are significant gaps. I think we have the right policies, we have the right frameworks. I did talk about the Zika requirements for reporting. And Zambia, by the way, is one of the few countries globally that has adopted these standards. So we are taking leadership, even from a reporting perspective, because many countries are basically taking a wait and see mode and say, no, let's see. Let's see how this pans out. But it's just a matter of time. Whether a country adopts today or adopts in 5 years' time, they will have to adopt, because this is probably the biggest challenge our generation is going to have to deal with. So the fact that we're taking leadership and starting this journey, I think will only position us to be in a very good place when everybody else is trying to catch up.
Great stuff. That's very excellent to know. Now, what role can incentives and subsidies play in encouraging sustainable practices and investment?
I think they can play a huge role, primarily because at the moment, sustainability is probably being seen as synonymous with compliance and as a burden, rather than being seen as an opportunity, and that there's significant good and benefit that can come from a business embarking on a journey that is sustainable, right? So if we can throw in incentives to encourage sustainable practices, and it's incentives beyond, maybe just withholding tax, but really thinking about the different aspects of how we do business. So if I'm engaging with Millennium TV, for example, my small business, or Millennium TV is engaging with me, vice versa, Millennium TV can basically try and understand what am I thinking about ESG practices or sustainability practices within my organization. Because even a small business can think about sustainability. So it's not just for your big corporations. Because remember, we talked about how there's this small farmer that was potentially heavily impacted by the drought and did not get that opportunity to build resilience. But if that SME starts to think about building resilience today, the next drought that is going to come around, or the next flood that's going to come around, that they'll be a bit more prepared. They won't have to spend too much or have to think about going to find different sources of capital at gunpoint per se, because imagine businesses having to buy generators, a cost that was never planned for. So many had to go to financial institutions to get that support, but sometimes maybe they were not formalized enough and couldn't get that, credit that they needed. And then they probably ended up shutting down, right? So when you think about it from when you think about it from just a business itself, what benefit can the business get from walking this sustainability journey? And thinking beyond just the compliance side of things. So the incentives, to come back to your question, the incentives will help us to start to think about sustainability differently. That we'll start to see opportunities in a sustainability agenda versus the compliance side of things.
Now, can you share examples of successful, sustainable economic growth initiatives or projects that have achieved positive and environmental and social outcomes?
So I'll try and think about it from a local perspective. And I think the challenge that's there, without any meaningful reporting, it's very difficult to find those case studies, right? Because companies are not reporting enough, and for various reasons, either because maybe they don't want to overstate their progress on how well they are doing from a sustainability perspective, to avoid greenwashing, which is really like overestimating how well you're doing from a sustainability perspective. But with the coming of the reporting requirements, we'll start to see more of these stories that are feeding into your question. But even with that limited information, I think we've heard some really good stories, even from a local perspective. When I think about the work that Komako, for example, is doing with the smallholder farmers in Eastern Province, these are farmers that they've been working with, and they've been able to generate or to develop projects that are offsetting emissions. And because these projects are offsetting emissions, they've been able to now trade the credits that arise from these offsets. And then the communities have actually gotten money from these projects. So you have chiefs that are now getting, chiefdoms that are getting this extra revenue that they can then push back into their communities and develop their communities even more. I think that's one that, if can be scaled in Zambia, would be one of the biggest ways that we can achieve economic growth, protect the environment, and then socially inclusive outcomes, because then we're going to incorporate everybody within the outcomes from these projects. So you have these projects that ensure that the community is benefiting from whatever they sell. So yes, the community was involved in these activities, and then we've been able to go and sell these credits on the international market. And then they've come back and said, this is your share of the money that we've made. We've heard the president talk about how he would like to see a mechanism that is more transparent, that ensures that the communities benefit, and that it's very clear that the communities are being given a fair share of what is actually generated and sold. So we'll see a lot in this space as well. But I think that's definitely one that comes to mind, that touches on the social aspect, the environment aspect, and then economic advancement as well. I think recently I saw on one of the news items, Zambif basically being funded by AFDB for their expansion project. And one of the main reasons why AFDB participated in that transaction was the impact that expansion project was going to have, because it's going to reach smallholder farmers, outgrower farmers that are part of Zambia's value chain, right? So when we think about economic advancement and social inclusivity, including all of these different SMEs and players, job creation from this expansion project, that I think is another example that ticks the box in terms of a project that ultimately, yes, it benefits Zambia in terms of their growth, but at the same time is also considering the economic activities around the communities that support them, the supply chain that feeds into Zambia. I'm sure there are many examples, but these are the ones that are definitely top of mind just from the recent news articles that have been shared.
Great stuff. If you're just joining us, we have Rabecca Silolezya, a sustainability expert on the Indaba show this evening. And, so far, so good. Can you share examples? Oh, sorry, we've tackled that one. What lessons can be learned from these examples that you've just given us, and how can they be applied more broadly?
Sure. No, I think that's a great follow-up question.
Yeah.
For the first one around communities really benefiting from the preservation of nature, specifically carbon projects, I think the examples that we can learn is that we should be able to scale these types of projects. Like every single community or chiefdom that has, whether it's forests that can be preserved or that can engage in sustainable practices, because the work that Komako was doing or is doing with the farmers in Eastern Province is really centered around improving the health of the soil. So they plant nitrogen fixing trees alongside whatever other crops that they're planting. So imagine being able to scale sustainable agriculture practices, that every single farmer that is growing maize also planting these nitrogen fixing trees alongside their maize fields, because there is that added benefit to replenish the nutrients in the soil. And then you now have this extra benefit if those projects can then be packaged into a project that can then be put out on whether it's the international markets to sell the credits that are generated, or even locally, because we're also developing our local carbon markets. So I think we should start to think about these solutions being localized even for the farmer that only has 1 hectare or 10 hectares, how can they also contribute and participate in these types of projects? And then I think lessons that can be learned are really that if communities are included in these activities, and that there's a right mechanism around it, that the communities will benefit. Imagine communities getting, I think the amounts that I was seeing were quite significant. I think it was like the first story I saw being reported around the Komako activities, I think it was a $3 million check that was given to the chiefdoms. Hopefully I've gotten the number correctly, but it was in millions of dollars. And it was a significant amount. Now imagine a chiefdom being able to access that type of funding beyond CDF, beyond all these other resources, that they have almost like a guaranteed amount, because as they're entering into these agreements, they know that over the next 10 years, every year we're going to be able to generate this much in credits, and therefore this is the revenue that will be generated from the project, and the community will get X percentage. So if the community already knows that every year we're going to get 12 million kwacha or 20 million kwacha, communities should then be able to plan around that. And lessons that can be learned from this is really that is in asking ourselves, are communities ready and have the capacity to implement projects at that scale? Projects that can, leverage that 12 million kwacha, really improve the community, build hospitals, build schools, build bridges, like just really develop the community, send kids to school on bursaries. And this would be really as a result of the revenue that's generated from their own activities, and that they can see the direct linkage. If we take it back to the original conversation around nature and seeing it more valuable than when we cut it down trees, if the community can see the value of when we preserve these trees and manage these forests and ensure that there are no wildfires, ensure that the ecosystem, the game is protected, that this is the resulting benefit. And this resulting benefit is so much more than these trees that we were trying to cut down, because then we have a much more impactful approach to development in our community.
Great stuff. Now, how can economic growth be more inclusive and equitable, and what role can businesses and government play in achieving this?
How can economic growth be more inclusive? I think it's in recognizing that we have a responsibility as a business or even as a nation to the communities that we draw resources from. So when you think about a business, and the same can apply to the nation, is how do we create value as a business? Or how do we create value as a nation? Now, if you think about a business, value is created in different ways. It's not just the capital that the investors put in. It's in the nature. We talked about nature. If I need to use water, it's the water. But at the same time, value is also being created by the human capital. The employees that come to work 100% ready to deliver and meet our objectives. That is value being created. You have a healthy population, healthy workforce. And also you have a community that is supporting you in the achievement of your goals, right? So when you think about all these different interactions, these different relationships that intersect with the business, a business has to start to think about, have I involved all these interactions adequately? Have I engaged with them? So stakeholder engagement becomes really critical. Have I engaged with the community, and am I impacting the community positively? If I'm impacting the community negatively, do I even know that I'm impacting them negatively? And that comes from engaging with the community, right? So in order for a business or even the nation to start to think about inclusivity from a social perspective, we have to first of all understand our interactions with the different stakeholders. And once we understand those interactions, it's very easy now to respond to the needs. So if the needs in the community are that they need an empowerment scheme for their youth because there's too much unemployment, then that should be the response, as opposed to going to maybe planting trees, because it's much easier for you to go and plant trees. But are you actually responding to the needs of the business? So CSR in this case, from a business perspective, needs to even become more intentional, not because Millennium TV is doing this, then the next TV station should equally do the same thing, because your stakeholders are different from the other businesses' stakeholders. So once you start to understand what your stakeholders need, how you're impacting them as a business, it's very easy to now respond and include them in your value creation process and how you give back to them. So I think inclusivity definitely comes from businesses really thinking about how do we incorporate communities and the different relationships in how we see our business going forward. I think for a business to think about it operating in isolation, I think that's a very false way to even start to think about it, right? Or for even the government, and that's why all these different agendas are really speaking to sustainable development, inclusivity, because they recognize that you can't have a population that is living, maybe 60% of the population is living below the poverty line, and yet you want to aspire to be a middle income nation. How do you become a middle income nation when most of your population can't afford the basic needs, right? So you'll see that even in the green growth strategy, for example, most of the investments are going towards basic services, like the things that we're quote unquote taken for granted, but these are basic services. Access to the right infrastructure, access to the right services, healthcare, education, because ultimately that then is going to spur that economic development. So I think inclusivity can be incorporated from a national level through these strategies that should then be implemented. From a business perspective, it's now interacting with our stakeholders. How are we impacting the different stakeholders, and are we responding positively enough?
Great stuff. And, you could have touched on this one a little bit, but what are the social implications of unsustainable economic growth, and how can they be mitigated?
And that's a good one, just following from the one that
exactly.
we were just from talking about. I think the implications of unsustainable growth, the social implications of that, are really that you're going to have a very dissatisfied population, right? And dissatisfied for various reasons, either because maybe they don't have access to the right jobs or healthcare, or that they're not being included in economic activity. And then you now have this idle population, and we don't even want to know what that could look like. So we have Africa, for example, and I'll keep coming back to the fact that Africa and Zambia are going to have young populations by 2050. And if these young graduates are not able to find employment, what is the alternative? We need to start to think about, what will it look like if we have 90% of the young population unemployed? Are they going to be in active economic activity, so that maybe they are not in jobs, but they are actually running businesses and creating employment? But what if they are not running businesses and creating employment? Are we going to see an escalation of, the junkie problem that we have, for example? And these are the things that we'd have to start to think about. And that's why everybody has to be carried along, right? Everybody has to be carried along. And it might mean that perhaps the solution is not in everybody getting a job. Yes, jobs will be created, but the solution might be in businesses and the government empowering people to create businesses that then create jobs. That it should be fashionable and okay to be just right out of college. You go straight into your SME that you've created, is formally set up, has access to the right support, the right financial services, and that over time, that then becomes the business that then creates those opportunities for the other generation that is coming behind us.
Great stuff. We're in the dying minutes of the show, and would like to find out, how can businesses prioritize social responsibility while still driving economic growth?
So businesses specifically can prioritize social responsibility by, it comes back to, I think, my earlier comments around really thinking about their contribution to the national agenda, right? Yes, your stakeholders might just be, your supplier and your customers. But when you think broadly around how is my business contributing to the national agenda, the country has, let's say, a target to achieve by 2030. How is my business contributing? How is my business aligning with sustainable development goals? How is my business supporting, the KPIs under the 17 SDGs? How is my business supporting the government's other agendas from a sustainability perspective? So businesses have to start to think of themselves as significant contributors individually as well, and not that it's for the big companies. I know you always hear of, what about that company? Why isn't it doing anything? No, but every single business has a responsibility. Every single business has interactions. So beyond those interactions, how can that business contribute to the success of the communities that it operates in, right? How does that business ensure that it continues to have a social license to operate? I think we take advantage of the fact that there is this social license to operate. Yes, you have the permits from PACRA, you have all these different formalities in place, but if the community is not taken care of and you're polluting the environment that the community is relying on, it's just a matter of time that arrangement or that relationship fractures and then prevents the business from being able to do its business on a usual basis. So I think businesses can start to think about their responsibility as being a shared one in the sense that their sustainable growth is interlinked to ensuring that the stakeholders that they rely on are also equally moving ahead and are benefiting. So once we recognize that, it becomes even easier as businesses to come up with strategies that are responsive to the different stakeholders that we interact with and create value with.
Great stuff. I think time has really flown by. And I'm telling you, I believe that just like me, our viewers have gotten a wealth, of knowledge from this very exciting topic, sustainability for economic growth. We know that, you were very busy, but thank you for making time to come and address this very important.
No, thank you for having me. And what better day than on Africa Freedom Day,
right,
for us to have this very important conversation, because when I reflect on our freedom today, the freedom that we have is because of that liberation that we got at that time. And that's why we're celebrating today. But most importantly, in 2050, are we going to be liberated from the harsh impacts of climate change?
Right.
Or our economy is going to be resilient enough at that time that we'll be leaders in the sustainability conversation and not victims?
Great stuff. There you have it, our viewers. Mrs. Rabecca Silolezya, sustainability expert, chartered accountant, on the National Economic Indaba show discussing sustainability for economic growth. Thank you so much for making time.
Thank you, Nakiwe. It's a pleasure.
Until next time on Friday, when we bring to you yet another exciting guest. And on behalf of the studio crew, my name is Nakiwe Simpungwe saying
Imagine having access to the latest news at your fingertips. Introducing the newly rebranded and improved Daily Nation website. With our innovative online flipping page feature, you can read the newspaper just like you would in print. Plus, with our subscription-based model, you will get access to exclusive content, archives, and more. So why wait? Sign up now and experience the future of news. Daily Nation, now at your fingertips.